Okay, hello everyone. My name is Donald Palmer, and I'd like to welcome you to Ask Our Expert, Reach Society's interaction with experts in our community. And this is our third episode. And for those of you that are not familiar, Ask Our Experts is where we get to analyze important issues that impact the modern Black community. And today's topic is the Qualification Society and the modern Black community. What does the Qualification Society mean? And we'll be discussing all of that with our 6 experts. And let me briefly introduce our 6 experts. And I'll do this in alphabetical order of their surnames. So there's Angela Clarke. She's a psychologist, counsellor, adult health and social care manager, and RAFFA CEO. Then there's Dr. Keith Davidson, former Adventist education director and head teacher and CAD publisher and author. Then there is Emeritus Professor Sir Geoff Palmer, OBE, Barley Abrasion process inventor, human rights champion and author. Then there's Dr. Dwain Neil OBE. He's the chairman of Reach Society, business leader and author. Our 5th expert is Professor Oreffo, Professor of Musculoskeletal Science, Director of Center for Human Development, Stem Cell and Regeneration at the University of Southampton, and also the founder of the Cowrie Scholarship Foundation, which wants to fund up to 100 disadvantaged Black British students through the UK university system within the next decade. And our final expert is Paul Riddell, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Consultant and Enfield Caribbean Association Deputy Chair. Can I say a warm welcome to you all? And I'm really grateful that you've taken the time to be with us this afternoon to discuss a very important area about what we mean by the Qualification Society. So we're going to be hearing about what we mean by attainment aids. We're going to be hearing what we mean by PISA system. And to actually start the ball rolling, I'd like to begin to ask Dr. Keith Davidson to describe what is meant by the Qualification Society, particularly as it applies to the UK. So Keith, I wonder if you can begin our discussion, and thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and greetings to all our colleagues here. Nice to see you all. So to kick this off, as a definition of the Qualification Society, I would submit that it means that the UK society expects that its population should have the qualifications, knowledge, training, and skills to be successful citizens. Keywords here: qualifications, knowledge, training, and skills. In fleshing out this headline position, I'm further saying that the Qualification Society is pivotal in determining 3 things. 1, whether a person is rich or poor. Number 2, the nation's future financial and economic outcomes. And 3, its global and international standing with respect to indicators such as PISA levels, knowledge and capacity around research and development, and skills competitiveness. In summary, with respect to this definition, both the summary, the headline, and also the wider definition. In summary, I would say qualifications are central to the vision of, firstly, the individual's holistic growth or mission in life, and secondly, society's future development and prosperity. I would just leave you with these points to hold on to, if you may. key words to hold on to as we consider this definition around the theme of qualifications. Number one, learning, knowledge, skills, wealth and poverty, and global indicators such as PISA, research and development, etc. So, Mr. Brother Chair, or Mr. Chair, that's what I would submit to you as the working definition for our discussion as we continue on this theme of the Qualification Society.
No, thank you, Keith. You highlighted some really important words, sort of around one's holistic growth, and also how this is important for society. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to get each of the panelists to, in a way, give their own experience of a qualification society, relationship to their journey. And then what we're going to do is to then put that in the context of the modern Black community, and perhaps we'll get to hear more about PISA levels and what that means. So, but Keith, I think you've really, provided a platform for which we can go on. And I really like the way you describe learning and knowledge, but links that to wealth and poverty. I was recently made aware, and I think Dwain and I commented on this, and we may touch on this in the UK with the levels of numeracy and literacy, and how that is such an important skill that opens so many doors. It's quite alarming, the proportion of people in the UK that don't have those basic skills and can't really progress, to the point where I'm aware John Lewis is now actually having classes for their workers in terms of numeracy and literacy. So it does demonstrate the real importance of this. So I wonder if I could get each of the panelists to describe what their experience of a qualification society. And I'll start off with Angela, with you first, please.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Professor Palmer. It's really good to be here this evening and to be able to share my experience of a qualification society and what that means to me. If I can say that from an early age, a really early age, I remember my mother in the home stressing the importance of education. She did that from the time I remember, from when I was at school. And it was interesting because I remember that for me, she referred to it as education. When it came to my brothers, she would say to them that it was important that they had a trade. And there was always that distinction. It was important that I had an education, but it was important that they had a trade. And she drummed that into us. And so when I did go to, I went to school, left school, not really with much qualifications as such. And there were a number of reasons for that. And I suppose in my final years, because of personal experiences that I had, I wasn't as focused as I should be. But also, I don't feel that I got the necessary support through that time from my teachers, who kind of then said, because I think they felt I wasn't making the effort. I think they knew my capabilities, but because I wasn't actually attaining what I should, they kind of then switched off and said, if you carry on like this, you're not going to amount to anything. If I was you, I would go and I'm sure it was Sainsbury's that at that time that I was told to maybe pitch my tent and go and apply to. But I was still in a negative frame of mind, but those words that my mum kept telling me about an education kind of stuck with me. So the first thing that I did was apply to Southwark College to do at that time, and I'm talking about many years ago now, a BEC National Diploma in Business Studies, because I knew that I wanted to get into business. I knew that I wanted to do something with business at that time. Wasn't sure what, but started, went to college, completed that. But then, because I had responsibilities at that time, I had to go back to work. So it didn't extend my education much more than that for a good 10, 15 years, I would say. But it didn't take away the fact that I still had an appetite to study. I still remember my mum saying that you're not going to amount to anything if you don't have education. And I fell into I started working in the civil service, actually working in a job centre. That was probably my first real job. So I was a civil servant at quite a young age. But because I was and it was interesting, working in the job centre, what I experienced was kind of a revolving door syndrome. And I saw the same people get jobs and then come back round. And I also remember the emphasis on statistics as opposed to helping individuals actually get into the right jobs. So it was all, it's basically get them into any job because that will, our statistics will be on point. But as I said, the revolving door was because people weren't matched appropriately, didn't go into the right jobs. I kept seeing them coming back time and time again. After 2 years, I kind of said, this is not for me, because unless I'm able to make a positive difference in the lives of these people, that wasn't. So I left the civil service at that time, went into a private sector, ended up in a job that I said that I would try for a temporary period of time. It was a job that I got by chance. I would say by chance, because I was offered I was in a permanent job, but someone in the job centre who knew me and I'd worked with them basically said that there is a job going and I think it will be just up your street if you apply, but it is a temporary job. I went for the job, got it, took the chance of leaving my permanent job for a temporary role, and remained in that role actually for quite a long time, about 22 years. But what I quickly realized when I got the job was that I needed to get qualified. I needed to up my game. I needed to study. And that's what I did. I went, because I loved helping people, counselling. That was the first thing I did. And this was all, let me say that this was all while I was working full time. I went and I did a diploma in counselling. That was the first qualification, apart from my BEC National Diploma that I did. I then enjoyed the counselling so much and wanted to do more that I went on to do my first degree, my honours degree in psychology. I then went on, and I had a buzz for it then. I think, by this time I had children, I was married, and I still wanted to continue because I was in a job that I really loved, was being exposed to all sorts of things. So I did my degree in psychology, degree in sociology, and then went on to do my master's in counselling and psychotherapy, because I realised that was definitely the area that I wanted to be in. I wanted to be a psychologist. I wanted to do counselling. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy. I'm saying it sounds so easy, but it wasn't. It wasn't, because I was met with lots of kind of pitfalls, but I was determined. I was determined to prove my teachers wrong, maybe, but also prove something to myself, that I could do it. And even after I did my master's, I went on to do kind of a level 7 diploma in leadership and management. So you might as well say that I'm a glutton for punishment, but I just felt that I needed to be authentic, and to be able to be authentic, I needed to kind of qualify myself, as it were. And you know, and that would, and it has done so much for me. It has, not just about the fact that I have letters after my name, and I may have said this before, but it wasn't actually the letters after my name. It wasn't the actual, just the qualification. It was the experience. It was the experience. It was the fact that I actually was able to, I suppose, to learn resilience, learn about determination, learn about what that meant. And I really thank my mum, because she didn't just drum it into us. She explained that I would not achieve what I wanted to achieve without education, without having that behind me. So that has stuck with me. I have passed that down to my children. Both my sons are successful and qualified because of it. So yeah, that's pretty much my journey in a nutshell. So thank you.
No, thank you, Angela. And as always, your journey is illuminating and inspiring. No, thank you for that. I have a phrase. What's it? Persistence overcomes resistance, and you've demonstrated that admirably. So the next one I'd like to call upon to describe, in a sense, their journey. We've heard from Angela is Dwain. Dwain, I wonder, I'm going alphabetically order here, I think. So, Dwain.
Yeah, thanks, Donald, for the opportunity to talk about my experience of the Qualification Society. My journey is quite different from Angela's in a number of ways, but nonetheless, one needed to be persistent in order to achieve your goals. And our family, we did not have an awful lot of luxuries, but I would describe my parents as ambitious and middle class in their outlook. My mother was trained to be a dressmaker, and that was the skill set she used throughout her life, because she started her own business and ran that until she retired at the tender age in her early mid-60s. And my father was the better of the two in terms of education. He was a policeman in Jamaica, fully literate, fully numerate. And so in our household, becoming fully literate and numerate was the standard. I have very strong memories of my father's homemade blackboard being used to teach us English, grammar, and also various aspects of maths. And that has never left me. So when I was in school, because I always enjoyed learning, I was all business in the classroom, and I played hard at break time, but as soon as it was time to be in class, I was all business. So no one should be surprised to hear me say that I got a dozen O-levels, and the sort of exotic ones that lots of people perhaps wouldn't have taken. I got an O-level in RE, and I got an O-level in art. And when I was doing my pure science and statistics at A-level, Mr. Cleaver said, just so that we can get the confidence going, because we're only about 6 or 7 of us doing that A-level, you should take the O-level in statistics. So those 3 exotic O-levels were added to the 9 I'd already bagged, which is why I got a dozen O-levels. Went into the 6th form, was very clear physics, chemistry, and maths were going to be my A-levels, because I absolutely loved science and knew that if I was going to convert the early qualifications into something for employment, I had to go to university. So when a lot of my peers, white and black, left school as if it was the end of their lives, education ended at 16, I was very clear it had to be A-levels, and I was very clear it had to be university. So I made sure that I had a really good time at university, but my physics and chemistry joint honors was my top priority. And I got a good pass in my first degree. Manchester University will always be my second favorite city in the country, because I met a really wonderful guy, Bill Newton, who saw something in me that I hadn't realized was there. And he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, Dwain, what are you going to do when you get your degree? And I said, I'm going to earn some money. I've been waiting a long time to earn some money. And he said, you've got your whole life to earn some money. Have you thought about doing a PhD? And to be quite honest, I had not. And that was something that I did think about and went back to him after having a little bit of a row with my mother, who was hoping that I was going to earn some money after 21 years. Yeah, 21, and I hadn't yet earned anything. But I took his advice, and that's why I've got a PhD today. So I was never ambivalent about the value of qualifications, because I knew without it, my pathway out of a poor family into making something of myself was through education. So whereas a number of my friends, white and black, were ambivalent, I was never ambivalent about the value if I stuck with it. And, you know, even after I started working in private sector, every time I was introduced to a training course in order to enhance my skill in any of the jobs I did, my answer was always yes. So along the way, I picked up more than a dozen certificates of various aspects of business skills in order to make sure that I was properly trained in any of the new things I did. And that mindset has stuck with me, because I've got 3 boys and a girl, and no one should be surprised to hear our message to our children was, you need to be qualified if you're going to compete for decent jobs. So they're all graduates and postgraduates. And I've actually said to my children, now you're young adults, the only time I'll have an argument with you is if you don't invest in my grandchildren in the way we've invested in you. So that's my experience of the Qualification Society. It's the principal way of moving from being poor into being middle class, and I'm eternally grateful to it. That's my little bit.
Okay, thank you, Dwain, and that's a really useful route that you've taken, which one could argue is traditional in many ways. And what's quite interesting about that time, and we want to explore this more, because you mentioned O levels, and for those of you who don't know, that they're GCSEs of today. But at the time you went to uni, it was only 2%, if I rightly remember, of the population.
Yeah, it was a very low percentage.
Very low. Now it's between 45% plus. But we'll come on to that, because I think that's something that's worth exploring. So if you notice, I'm putting in little tidbits so for us to discuss. Alphabetically, the next one is Richard. Sir, get your journey. What do you mean by a qualification society? And welcome to Ask Our Experts.
That's very kind, and it's an absolute pleasure to join this panel. So I'm delighted to be here today. So I had in some ways, a very traditional route through academia, but it's worth dissecting out a little bit. I've always been somebody who's interested in learning. I'm curious by nature, and my journey has a number of, if you like, key components: curiosity, serendipity, and a desire to always make a difference. That's always been part of my raison d'etre, if you like. But what was interesting is I actually had quite a privileged childhood. I was born in London. My father is Nigerian, or was Nigerian, and my mother was Irish. And so we went back to Nigeria. And as I said, we had a very privileged childhood. And then my father actually gained a scholarship to the University of Bristol in 1966. So that was quite rare in those days, to gain a scholarship to the University of Bristol in those days. And he arrived with my mother, and the civil war broke out in Nigeria just after they arrived. And my twin and I were trapped in the civil war. And we actually were evacuated a month before the war ended in December '69. So we arrived in Bristol, and one of the things that I will always stress is the importance of mentorship. And so education was very strong in our family. My father, of course, understood the power of education. So we knew the importance of education. It was very strong. But mentorship was really important because you can imagine arriving at the age of 8 in England, having been in a war with relatively limited English because we hadn't had as much schooling. It was really important to have good mentors, and I had a wonderful mentor in my primary school teacher who really took me under his wing, and my twin. I went to University of Liverpool, and that's where the curiosity and serendipity came in. And I was obsessed with something called vitamin A. And I did an honours project on vitamin A. And then I had the chance to go to Oxford to study vitamin A and bone. And so that was the reason I went to study vitamin A and bone. And when I was there, I then had the chance to go to America to do a research project on bone. So you can sort of see where I was going with this. And when I was in the States, 2 things happened. I was again mentored by Greg Mundy. He was the doyen of the bone field. And Greg told me, if you want to rise in this field, lose the afro, put on a tie, and rise from within as far as you can, and then make a difference. And one of the things that happened by going to the States was that I then came back to Zeneca Pharmaceuticals, now known as AstraZeneca. And one of my unique selling points was I'd been in the States. And of course, just about everyone, so we're talking about 1990, everyone who'd been recruited, degree, PhD or DPhil, had been to the States. I think there were 12 of us and 11 of us had been in the States. So that was our unique attraction to Zeneca. They were looking for something different to when they obviously did their SIFT. Maybe Dwain can talk to this. And then from AstraZeneca, I went and I was working on bone research. I then went to Oxford, and then I've been at Southampton for the last 23 years, and a professor for 17 years, working on translation of bone research from the bench to the clinic to make a difference in patients. So I'm not a medic, but our research is now in 25 different patients, and we're actually able to go from the bench all the way through and make that difference. And so again, it was that pathway of curiosity, the serendipity where I moved between areas of vitamin A into bone, and then bone into research, bone into translation. All of that came through, but there were things that were really important. One was the mentorship, my father instilling into me the power of education. And one of the things I always say, and I'm not claiming I came up with this, but knowledge truly is power. Knowledge is power, without a doubt.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It transformed my life, and it allowed me to make a difference. So now in slightly more years, I'll talk about the Cowrie scholarship later on. It allowed me to contact people and to actually start to have the conversations. So I'm a great believer in the power of education, as you'd expect me to perhaps say because of what I do, but it really does allow you to chase your dreams. It allows you to do things you want to do, and it provides the platform. Dwain said, obviously, the power of mobility, but it also allows you to think about how you want to achieve your purpose. And that's something that's really important. And that can be at any stage. Angela showed that. It can be at any stage. It doesn't have to be at 18. It can be later on. I'll stop there.
No, thank you, Richard. And I don't know if I've confessed this to you, but years ago, I don't know if you recall, we met at a conference around aging research. And I was just in the audience and I saw you, and the research that you were doing at that time was like, wow, this is amazing. And as we look now, we see what happens as you get older, and we talk about COVID, etc. So I was a young researcher at the time. Well, yes, I would say young researcher, and seeing what you were doing. So even though you don't know it, you're an inspiration then, and you're an inspiration now. So thank you.
That's very kind.
No, thank you. And talking of inspiration, our next expert is Sir Geoff. I wonder if you could talk about your educational journey, sir.
Right. Well, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much. And thanks for the opportunity to speak about qualifications and what they can do. Well, my mother, I will start with my mother because she's the main force in my gaining qualifications, not directly, but indirectly, because she came as an immigrant to London in 1951. And she was not educated in any way. She was a dressmaker. That's what she was called in Jamaica. But when she came to London in 1951, there weren't many dressmaking jobs. So she worked at night in the post office, sifting mail bags for about £4 a week. And she saved my fare to come here. So she worked from 1951 till 1955 to save £86. And that is, I'm speaking to you today because of that £86. Because had I stayed in Jamaica, I wouldn't have got the educational opportunities because of my background, where I came from in Jamaica. So I arrived when I was 14 years and 11 months. Unknown to my mother, that was not in her interest because in London, she was told that I had to go back to school because I wasn't 15. And therefore, I'm speaking to you today because of that 1 month. My mother objected. She said, you know, I should go to work because that's what she brought me here for, but the system. And the system is very important. The system said I had to finish school. So I went to one school, I won't call the name, in London, in Islington, and they gave me a test and designated that I was educationally subnormal. I was ESN. And of course, that was a Eurocentric test where I knew nothing about. For example, in Jamaica, if you say to a Jamaican in my time, what was a tap? You wouldn't know, it was a pipe. And that kind of difference, cultural difference in language, caused a lot of Black kids a lot of problems in the 50s. And therefore, I had to go to another school, which was called Secondary Modern. And that school was designed mainly for white kids who weren't going to get anywhere anyway. So that's where I went, Shelburne Road Secondary Modern. But I was very good at cricket. And the head teacher took me for the summer term, not just for 1 month. Fortunate again for me. And I was picked to play for London because I was very good at cricket. And that got me into the grammar school. And in the grammar school, Highbury County, I just played cricket and for about 3 years. But I managed to leave in 1958 with some qualifications. When I went in, I had none. I had not passed any exams in Jamaica. So when I left in 1958, I had about 4 O levels, despite the fact I was playing mainly cricket. And I had an A level, I think, in biology. I wasn't bad at biology. And I had an A level in biology and maybe chemistry, I'm not sure. However, I got a job at London University, at Queen Elizabeth's College. And that's where I learned that qualifications were important. Because Professor Chapman, who took me, he said he felt I had some ability. And I didn't know what that meant. He gave me some time off, and between 1958 and 1961, I got 3 A levels, going to night school, time off from work, which Chapman gave me. I got 3 A levels, and I got about 6 O levels in terms of total. So Chapman said he wanted me to go to university. Now, I came from a background where nobody's in my family had ever been anywhere near a university. So I didn't know what that meant, even though I was working in one, cleaning up after students. But I applied to lots of universities at the time, and none of them would take me in 1961. And Chapman was so annoyed at this, he rang up Leicester University And that's how I got into Leicester University, not because of my qualifications, but because of a phone call. So I went to Leicester, got an honours degree in botany. I left in 1964. So I was qualified academically, but an academic qualification in the middle of London in 1964 didn't mean very much. So I was given a job peeling potatoes, which I took because I thought it was close to botany. And I peeled potatoes for about 6 months, in June to December. And I had an interview with a famous politician where he told me to go home and grow bananas. And I did point out to him it was difficult to grow bananas in Haringey. It didn't get me the job, but I felt better. But what is important, I had an interview in Edinburgh with a very famous lady called Professor Anna MacLeod. And that interview changed my whole academic now. I had qualifications, but it's how you use those qualifications now to build a career. So qualifications are about your career, not just getting them. So when I came to Edinburgh, I had an honours degree in botany. I was interviewed by Professor Anna MacLeod, and she took me. And she never, the interview didn't last very long. But when I got to know her afterwards, she said, I took you because of the degree of difficulty you went through to get those qualifications. So the way you gain your qualifications, the effort you put in will be recognized as part of your qualification. And therefore she took me for the PhD, which I got. I started in 1965 for my PhD and I finished in 67. So things got quicker. And getting a PhD in a couple of years is not normal, I'm told. I then went and worked in research after I got my PhD, and it's my research work changed the whole way people saw how grains grew. You have a big industry which is international: Carlsberg, Heineken, Budweiser, Coors, Guinness. And the point is that the way they thought the grain grew and changed itself from barley into malt was incorrect. So you get an immigrant arriving in 1955 in a secondary modern school telling the big international companies what the way they thought the grain grew. I said it was wrong. And I used that concept where what I said is so simple, child understand it. The whole world thought the grain digested itself from its germ. And my research, when I looked at it carefully, which was published in Nature, I said it was the bran that controlled the digestion, the bran. And because I said it was the bran, I used that concept to develop an abrasion process where the grain is scarified and then it digests itself from both ends. As if it has two germs, it digested itself from both ends. And that took off 2 days of the processing time. And the process is called Barley abrasion. You can look on your phone, just type in Barley abrasion and you'll find the work. So in terms of qualifications, it allowed me later on to be a consultant for Guinness. It allowed me to consult for Coors. It allowed me to go to Africa and help large international companies use the local grain rather than using only European grain. And that concept has developed the use of local grain in Africa. So small farmers are now have big international outlets. So what I'd like to say finally is education works. Just 2 words, education works. And it works on the basis that it is a way which people assess your capacity, qualifications. And therefore, the better they are, the easier you will find it. And therefore, try as hard as you can to get as many qualifications and think about what you want to do with these qualifications. Don't get qualifications which do not fit what you think you want to do. And I think that there are great opportunities, and if you need help, seek it. Don't, in fact, make a mistake with your qualifications, but they will give you the sort of life that I've never dreamt of, which I have today. Thank you.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Thank you, Sir Geoff. And there's so much to ponder. The one that I'm still shocked by is you did your PhD in 2 years, and that was I don't know, 50 years ago, and yet as Richard will testify, and no doubt Dwain, the average is 4.
No, you tell me.
I'm not into Geoff's class, but I took 3 years to the day. Yeah. I was determined not to go a day over 3 years.
But now, on average, they're 4. So I'm in awe, well, thank you, and again, really inspiring, and the idea that education works, and it's a bit what Richard commented on. A key part of that was having a mentor or a champion. If Professor Chapman didn't make that phone call,
no,
yeah, so
right.
That's really important. And I'm aware that you are even, I mean, we honor you and think you're fantastic, but I know in Nigeria, they think you are, the fact that Nigeria Guineas is doing so well, so I'm sure you are, know that not only the pride of Scotland, but the pride of Nigeria. So, and Nigerian Guineas does taste very nice as well.
Yeah, right. It's a little bit stronger.
Yeah, no, it is. So thank you, Sir Geoff. So if I can get Paul to describe his journey and also what he means by a qualification society. Paul.
Thank you, Donald. And I feel as if I'm in exalted company listening to you guys talk. Well, in many ways, not in every way, I'm kind of the odd one out because I've kind of managed to pursue a professional career without having a degree or going to university, which I think is part of the reason Dwain, being his clever self, wanted to have somebody who could give a different perspective.
Paul, you're a star. You've always been a star.
Thank you, Dwain. But it's funny when you have to listen to I listen to everybody very intently, and I could feel a little bit of myself in listening to everybody, and it brought back a lot of memories, Donald, because I hadn't never told anybody this, and I've known you for a long time, is that I actually wasn't supposed to be here, because the old plan was to my dad came in 1960, my mom in 1961. And the whole idea was to save money and send us to school in Kingston, because we're in the south of the island, a small town. And I walked to school every day. I did a 5-mile round trip to another town outside, not too far away. And I'd done about probably just a few months of my secondary education. I moved back into the town, and I was relieved because it was going to be a short walk, and we had to come to England. So I came to England late 1967 into Cole, England. And it's quite an interesting story because the first year was a real struggle. But we were quite clear our parents wanted us to come and have a good education, like that generation, the Windrush generation, and make something of ourselves. My dad used to have this thing where he would touch us on our shoulder and said, "Don't make me regret sending for you." It was always like this thing he constantly would say all the time. So the first year was difficult. I cried a lot because I wanted to go back, to be perfectly honest. But then, I managed to turn myself around. In the second year, at the end of the second year, and we're all in the age group who remember this, it was a class of 28, 2 black kids. The only other black child in the class was born here. He thought I was really strange because, he would hear the accent and he would look at me mysteriously. Anyway, in those days, what used to happen is that you used to have form classes. And at the end of the year, your form teacher would read out where you came in class. It's an old system, but that's what they did. But they started from the bottom. and they work their way up. So he starts and he's reading, he's going on. He's got, I thought to myself, my name hasn't been mentioned. And he got to the top 3. And I'm sitting back and thinking, this is interesting. He mentioned the third person. It wasn't me. He mentioned the second person and it wasn't me. I'd come top. Now, you imagine for a child not too long coming from the Caribbean, I was bursting. However, the teacher decided he was going to humiliate me by saying in front of the whole class that he knew it from the day before and he had gone to see the headmaster to check whether or not it was correct because he couldn't believe that somebody like me could come top of the class. Now, I'd come top in English, top in maths, and top in history, and got good results in all the others. And that's stayed with me forever. I felt completely dejected. And listening to Angela, it made me realize, that for quite a few years, I kind of lost focus. So by the time I left, I had 2 O-levels and some CSEs, and I went to work for an organization in Enfield town called Eastern Gas. I don't know if anybody remember that. Eastern Gas, I remember that. And I was just kind of pushing paper. They sent me on a business course and I was just bored. And this is where, listening to Sir Geoff, sometimes you're lucky. It was in a conversation with one of my brother's friends and I was telling him how bored I was. He said, what do you want to do? So I said, well, my heroes are Martin Luther King, Marcus Garvey, C.L.R. James. I want to do something because I want to do something to help my people. So he tells me about this organization called the Commission for Racial Equality. And that was the change that I needed. So I made some inquiries and I applied for a job and I got a job. That job was, as the old-fashioned, it was the clerical assistant. It was the lowest grade. My mom was furious. Why have you wasted time and you got to do this job? And I said, no. Again, I was lucky because there was an elderly Jamaican guy worked there great guy called Leslie Scave, who took me under his wings and used to advise me. By the time I left, and Dwain would know, I was a principal officer. I was writing reports. I was writing policy documents. And what I'd done through all those years was, if there was a seminar, I went. I wasn't paying for it, so I would go. If there was a training course, I went on it. If the commission published a document, any report or anything, I read it. So I was well versed in what the CRI was doing. So I think that was about 6 promotions I got during that time. I had jobs like being the head of legal strategy, the head of diversity and equality. So what I did worked for me because I was in an organization that allowed me to grow and to develop the skills that I needed to do that job. And I will tell you, anybody who knows me well is that I love my job. I haven't ever seen it as a job. It's been my passion for my life. And because it was something that I wanted to do. So when I heard Keith talking about, the criteria for the Qualification Society about learning, knowledge, skills, I acquired all that stuff to the extent that I got to a point where I said to myself, I was confident enough to leave full-time employment, set up my own business association and find work. So now I'm a freelance consultant and I work for different organizations, but kind of mainly for one. But now I'm seen as a specialist in my area of work. And one of the things that concerns me, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, is that I tell people my story and it's kind of saddened when people think that, poor people can't do that anymore. You can't get somebody like you can go in an organization without a degree. And I agree with everybody, you need qualifications. I'm not against it but it is a concern of mine. And I tend to, I don't know if we're going to get around it, I tend to kind of really like the German model of the dual education system, but that may be something that will come later on. Now, the thing, I just want to finish on this. One of the things I did learn though, was that although I didn't go to university and have a degree, my children, thankfully, have. And my daughter is, I'm very proud of my kids. My daughter went to Leeds University and she's a Russian graduate. And she's now the head of global advocacy at CARE International. And my son went to did history and politics at Leicester, Sir Geoff's University. and is now head of equality and diversity at NHS England.
Yes.
They're always having a go at me and saying it's my fault for the jobs that they're doing. They would have gone into the private sector if it wasn't for me. So you know, it's something that I'm really, really kind of proud of. And another thing which I think this is a family thing, and this is the wider family. And I was the one that actually discovered this at a family to get together when I was doing the family tree. And it came to kind of looking at all the kids that were born in England. And I realized that all the kids that were born in England from this family, every single one of them have been to university.
Fantastic.
Every single one of them. That's my kids, my brother's kids, my sister's kids, and my uncle's kids. Every single one. I kind of feel sorry for the ones who are coming behind, but every single one of them have been to university. And I think that for me is a wonderful achievement.
It is.
No, Paul, that is a wonderful achievement. And don't underestimate, and that's something we're going to get to, you know, in terms of your journey and, you know, perhaps coming out of school with very little, but in a sense, and I'm really grateful for Keith's definition.
Yes.
Because that's really important, because in any job, it is about learning. And you know, we call it CPD now. So, yeah. and the fact that you were able to develop that skill set, that's the same thing. So, whereas what Angela did, she went to night school, etc. Yeah. You did the same, but you read up all those documents. So you were of the equivalent. Basically, you were acquiring knowledge.
Yes.
And that's really important. And I really like the connection with Jamaica. Yeah. Particularly something I resonate with my late father. And when he passed away, I went to Jamaica, heard stories about him. And one of the reasons he looked at me differently, because I was born in 62, the year of Jamaica's independence. And like many, it was a case where 3 were born in the UK, 3 were born in Jamaica. And it was that decision. And so my father often looked at me to say, well, look, and absolutely right. In terms of the children that were in the UK, you know, we all went to uni.
Yeah, brilliant.
So, you know, that's important. Keith, I want to touch on you because I know you described, you know, and you provided a fantastic definition of the Qualification Society. So for a minute or so, and then we're going to start dissecting the questions about within the modern Black community. But I wonder if you could share your educational journey.
Thank you, Donald. If you will permit me, I've been so inspired listening to everyone, especially Paul and Sir Geoff. So before I talk about myself, I just want to make a comment. It's been inspiring. So wonderful to hear the route that you all took, but especially I want to say to Sir Geoff, he's here, of course, that I knew about him before before he came to Reach, because I wrote a book with my colleague entitled, if you can see, Education, A Pathway to Success for Black Children. And Dwain knows about the book because he helped with the reading of the book. And in the first chapter, because the first chapter was about parents as first teachers. And I stumbled across a statement Sir Geoff made, which I thought was useful for that chapter. And I don't know if Sir Geoff will remember the statement he made. He said, I had a strong, traditional Black, religious, Jamaican, family-oriented background. I was outside the new young Black British culture of cultural isolation, drugs, music, and the dole. And here comes the cruncher. My mother and my aunts were my role models. They gave me my values. And so I picked that up, and because of that, I looked at his journey. So you see, I have to send him a copy of this book because it's,
Thank you. Thank you very much.
What he talked about the cricket and so forth, I mentioned that. He talked about a famous politician. He didn't name the politician, but I know who that person is. So thank you, Sir Geoff. I have to send you a copy of this book because
thank you, please.
I heard about you. I read about you before you came to Reach, and it was inspiring, and it's been inspiring tonight again. And not just you, everyone who's spoken has been inspiring. So what about me? Well, I think I did talk about myself a little bit. Was it episode 2 or 1? I'm not too sure. That I came here and was placed in a particular low class, and I had done all those things 3-4 years back in Jamaica, and my mother, went straight to the head teacher, and got me moved up. So that changed the situation for me, but not totally. When I left school, I stayed on into sixth form. I left school. I decided to work, and I got a job. I applied for one job and I got it with an accounting firm because I like numbers, called Allied Services. And it was good, except that I was sitting with two colleagues. They were much older than I am. And they were talking about the days of horse-drawn carriages going on the road. And boy, it was killing me. So I was going to Zurich for a church international meeting, and so I went to get my passport sorted out at the Jamaican High Commission, and desperate to leave this place, I asked them if they have a job, and they said I should go to another department, and I did, and I completed the form. I went away to Zurich, came back, and they sent me a letter to say I should come to see them. And I got a job at the Jamaican High Commission. The value of that was I started to retrace and learn more about Jamaica through that experience. I saw some of the politicians firsthand, Michael Manley and others. But then I move on to what I think was what that changed my life. I went to an organization called, it's very long-winded, Local Authorities Conditions of Service Advisory Board. So
I'm impressed you can still say it.
For short, it was LAGSAB. LAGSAB was the name, and I went there as an admin person and doing research back up to numbers, because that body dealt with the pay and condition of service for local authority workers, police, teachers, all shades. And so they formed the secretariat. So it had to do a lot of groundwork when they come together to negotiate. So I was enjoying that. And they decided to send me now to do my degree, because I'm doing research and so forth. So I went off, they paid for it to do my degree. But I was now enjoying that so much that one of the lecturers, and I thought he was a bit lazy, asked 2 of us to take the class every now and again. And I thought, well, this man is a bit lazy. But it changed my life, because I realized that maybe my mission in life was to be a teacher. And so, having completed the degree, I went full-time now to do my PGC. And that's the start of my journey, now 40 years in education. And it changed my life. After that, I went on, while I was teaching teaching economics in a school in Waltham Forest. Monarchs, I don't know if anyone heard of Monarchs.
Yeah, I know.
George Monarchs.
On the way to Chingford.
Yes, it was a grammar school before. So I was teaching economics there. I decided to still be in the business of learning. So I decided to do an MBA. And then I was called to the church, to our first secondary school that was set up in 1980. I was called to join them in 1983 as the financial manager of the school. So whilst I did my dissertation for the MBA, I didn't do the exam because I went straight September into this new job. And I didn't realize that I'd done so well with the MBA that they awarded me the certificate, although I didn't do the final because I had a distinction on the dissertation. So so that changed my life. Went there, and 2 years later I became the head teacher there because my background was still teaching. And having been thrown into the job of being the head teacher for this school, I decided I need to learn more. Back to learning. I need to learn more about leadership and all those things. So I went on to the University of London to do to the Institute of Education to do my master's in educational leadership. I did it there. And I had to read a lot because that helped me with my job to understand education. At that time, there was a change in the notion that education can make a difference. Before that, there was an understanding that, you just send the children to school, the school will babysit them, and they go off to jobs that their fathers or mothers had before. But that changed me having to understand more about the education system. And like Sir Geoff, I then went on in 2007 to do my doctorate in education at Leicester University.
Right.
And so although so Geoff took 2 years, I was doing this part-time with my colleague who wrote this other book here. It took us 6 years.
Well,
Double the time that Dwain had his, but then, we had to do it part-time because I was still working as education director then now for the British Union. I think Dwain knows the rest of that story because he did work for us at the union. So that's basically my journey. I found that education was really my niche in life, my mission. And I'm doing a few other things now. I do back to community leadership. I do publish now. I publish 3 books for myself and about 10 or 12 now for people in the community. The kind of mission that I'm on.
Thank you, Keith.
Excellent.
And having hear your stories, as Keith said, is brilliant. It's so inspirational. So I've got a couple of questions. Hearing your stories, so that we can dissect it more about what does Qualification Society mean for our community. And what I found interesting with all your stories was either the value set or the mindset from family and friends, particularly your parents. So, Paul talked about his dad, Angela, his mom, Sir Geoff's mom, and Richard talked about his father, and Keith, you spoke about your mum going to the school and demanding that, her son do something different, and Dwain talked about his parents. So it seems that at the parent or family level, that with all of you, there seems to be the understanding of education. So the question is that something do you believe that the community itself has a clearer understanding of that phrase, qualification? Because it's interesting that when you look at, if you talk about it, the Windrush generation, and it's true, I remember people from the Caribbean, folks from what we refer to as the Commonwealth, from African countries. It was this installation that education is key, that everyone knew the importance of qualification. They used to refer to it as a piece of paper, I remember that phrase. So is that something that you can recall? And is it something you think as a community we've lost? Or not lost, or do we understand it?
Yeah, can I say something?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that most of the, say you talk about Windrush generation parents, meaning when I was a boy, the whole idea, although you weren't being educated to get qualifications, we all knew that, you know, the word "me qualify."
Yes.
And that is about you are therefore trained or you have a skill. And we all understood that. And the fact is, in the 50s and 60s, what was one of the most devastating phrases used by the system, and I'll never forget it, it says that these Black parents have unrealistic expectations. What that meant was that the parents wanted educational achievement for their children. And the system was saying, your expectations are unrealistic because the kids haven't got the capacity and therefore it's not going to happen. And these parents wanted the best for their children. And they lobbied and complained and they tried. And so that's in our culture. We know that qualifications give you an opportunity. And what I said to the council recently, a council in Scotland, you cannot have equal opportunities if you've got inequalities in education. It's a nonsense concept, equal opportunity, if you've got inequalities in education, because people won't be able to take them. So we have, and we understand the importance of education, that it makes a difference in your life.
Right. Anyone else want to comment on that?
Well, the only thing I was going to add to the point from Sir Geoff was that we don't live in a meritocracy, and I think, or however you want to phrase that, and I think we realise, and our parents certainly knew it, that to actually reach where you want to reach, and it doesn't matter what stage, but you have to have your purpose in mind, and education will allow you to reach that in whatever way it's. I'm sure we'll talk about this, Paul can talk about, and Angela, about certification. But what becomes really important is that we don't live in a meritocracy. You have to have something that gives you that edge. You have to have something that gives you that distinction. You have to have something that's when you've got 100 CVs in front of X, they are looking, first of all, for those qualifications. But then I'm sure we will touch on this. What is it that Keith will know the numbers better than I do, with 40% of people gaining degrees today. It was different when I went to university in the late 80s. It wasn't 40% that went to university. So certain things have moved, certain challenges now arrive. But I think the biggest difference is we understand we don't live in a meritocracy. I can speak to academia, 23,000 professors, less than 50 Black female professors out of 23,000. That's just, and I won't bother telling, there's 155 Black male professors. So that's the only statistic I'll give you, but we don't live in a meritocracy, so we need the qualifications, and we need more than the qualifications, and hopefully you're going to try and pull on that. But I think that's why we and our generation now and our children understand the power of qualification. But perhaps one of the things is there is a dilution, and we're starting to, erode's not the right word, but we're not reflecting sufficiently on that position. And I think that's a danger that we're going to fall into over the next decade.
Donald, can I come in on the back?
Yeah, come in, Dwain. Yeah. I mean, this is, folks can comment on this.
The sentiment about our community understanding the importance of qualification is absolutely right. The challenge, however, living in the United Kingdom, is that you need to have more than just a generic understanding that qualifications help or matter, because you need to understand how the system works, and you need to be in a position to know that your children are benefiting at the right time at an appropriate rate. And the underlying fault line I have seen over the decades is that too many in our community, the modern Black community, does not have a robust enough grasp of how the system works. And by not having that robust grasp, your children can drift and fall behind for far too long, and you're not picking up on that. So one of the issues I perceive is that we need to, as parents, go further than just have a vague notion that qualifications matter. Your child goes into school, let's argue, is quite fluent, comfortable with numbers and can read. But as your child goes through the primary infant stage, if your child's reading is not noticeably improving, you should be concerned. You certainly shouldn't be waiting until your child is 10, about to transition into secondary education, to discover that your child at that age is illiterate because your child has gone backwards. Equally, if you're in secondary education, you cannot afford to just be meandering along, hoping that the school is going to be doing its work, because not only do we live in a qualification society, I believe we fundamentally live in a dishonest society. So there will be educators knowing full well that your child has capability, but is not keeping up. And those educators will not alert you to that slippage, which means you as a responsible parent need to keep up in order that you can monitor the progress your child is making. And, you know, that is part and parcel of the challenge of why, for me, we need to understand where the fault lines are when we talk about Black community and the qualification society in which we live. I would be willing to argue that if we lined up 100 Black parents and asked them to tell us what their understanding is of the qualification society in this country, few, if any, would be able to talk us through all the stages and why those stages are important. They would have a vague notion that, yes, it matters, but they wouldn't have enough of the detail. That, for me, is the gap that we cannot afford to continue to accommodate in our community. So qualifications matter, but we need to understand more about how the system works to ensure that our children are not deprived.
And can I speak, Donald? Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
And Dwain, yeah, I essentially agree with what you're saying. However, if you line up 100 parents, there is a good chance that that maybe 50%, if not more, of those parents haven't had the opportunity of the education system, and all they know is that they want their children to do better than they did. And also there is there's possibly the lack of ability to even spot the fact that their child isn't necessarily doing as well because of the fact that they haven't benefited, or, you know, they haven't had the benefit of the education system that they want for their children. So how then do we make sure that because we've heard on the platform that, you know, many of us have relied on someone to either mentor us or give us a chance or notice that we needed something, or give it, you know, and if the parents are not able to decipher the fact that their child is struggling, for one, because maybe they haven't got what it takes, and don't know that the education system, maybe I agree with you, what we need to do is to raise awareness about the system and what it entails and how to progress and what they should be doing and all of those things. But that's the reality. That is the reality.
Yeah, may I come in on the back of that? Because this point is such a powerful point. I don't think we should lose it. And you may want to bring it back when we talk about next steps, Donald.
Yeah, no, I
We
do.
have low-hanging fruit, I believe, in our community that we're not making enough use of. So let me say that in another way. When I go to a Muslim mosque, I know that that mosque gives advice to parents who don't have the knowledge, but they do have people with the knowledge in the mosque giving them the advice. I know when I go to a Jewish synagogue, I see parents getting the same advice from people with the knowledge, possibly teachers, head teachers like a Keith Davidson, who is able to give those parents who don't have the knowledge what they need to know. I'm actually saying within our community, we are awash with thousands of churches. Why are we not making better use of those churches to be centers of provision of essential information to parents who don't have the knowledge? We're also a community with tens of thousands of organizations. Why are more of those organizations not doing that job? So my challenge around the Qualification Society, we all have a vague notion in our community that it's important, but if we need to know more, those centers ought to be open to giving us that advice. Goodness me, we have such a high level of churchgoers. Are we really saying that we couldn't get that information from those places? So my feeling is we need to challenge those centers within our community to add more value. Because, you know, Reach Society has discovered one thing in the last 10 years. We are a community awash with a lot of well-educated, qualified people. And look at the work that has gone on the back of the pandemic. Look at the number of well-qualified, educated people in the health sector who've come out to share knowledge and information to encourage our community to take the vaccine, protect yourself, protect your family, protect your loved ones, and don't become a victim to long COVID. We could do that in education. So I'm not giving us a buy. You're right. Not everybody has deep knowledge.
Dwain's not giving a buy, but is it partly, Paul? Let's get your comments on this.
Briefly. I mean, I'd made a note of it actually, and I think that with next steps, it probably come back to it. But I think
we're going to come to next steps.
Right. I think it's a knowledge thing. I mean, I was a school governor for about 15 years in Enfield, and it always struck me that when I first started, I remembered I was the only Black governor in that school. And it was a very mixed school. And once the Black parents saw me, and so that as a governor, I had to deal with it all the time. And one of the things I realized that I never met one parent who didn't want their children to do well at school.
Yeah.
The only vision that they had was seeing their children succeed in school and in life. They wanted them to have a good education, make friends, realize their potential, develop good personal values, and become responsible members of society. But
so how is that?
This is where they were not in. This is not a criticism. This is an observation from that experience. They were not sufficiently involved in their children's education. Normally, it was the combination of factors around things like stress of managing work-life balance, and overseeing their children schoolwork. But I remembered that, and I think all of us have done this, I stuck to my children like glue. The teachers knew me. I went to that school. I never missed any event. They went to different schools. And I think that is kind of a central thing. So from somebody like me, and probably it's the same with Angela, you kind of built up this knowledge over a period of time by exposing yourself to that environment. You see what I'm saying? Because the teachers know you. They could talk to you. When my son wanted to do an history degree, we were called by the teacher, said, I want to talk to you, because she wanted him to do history and politics. So it was a combination of us and the teacher persuading him to do that. So that's a knowledge thing. I think Dwain is right that we need to build up the kind of critical mass in our community to get to that point, because we know all this stuff. More and more of our kids are going to university. I think I read something like it was like a huge leap for 28% from 2020 to 10.
Yeah.
But there are still, so more and more of them are going. So it shows that we get it.
Yeah.
And we realize the value of education in terms of having a successful life and achieving things. So I think it's more what Dwain said and Angela said. I think it's a way, we need to find a way, a process and a system of building up that critical mass of knowledge to make sure that people have access to it and that they can make better decisions.
I'd like to say, coming back, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to say that what has been said here, I mean, so true by all of you. Paul has just described that, and in a way, Angela too, that parents do want their children to succeed. The problem is they're not equipped with the how to do it. No. And that's the reason why, and this is not a promotion, this is the reason why we wrote that book. It was to be a kind of handbook to help parents to navigate the system. And if anyone look at the book, it has a lot about the background to education, how to deal with schools and so forth, the issue of exclusion, how to avoid that. So we've got to equip them as to how to navigate the system. And so back to what Dwain was saying, and he's right about that. One way in which we can is to use the agencies in our community, those institutions within our community, churches, mentoring groups, and so forth. I think Dwain talked about adding value, and we know that we have, for example, Reed Society is part of adding value in what it is doing. There are groups such as Urban Synergy, ACAP, which is in Bradford, Community Empowerment Network, that's a London-based group, RAFFA, Amos Bursary, Generating Geniuses. These are groups within. Yeah. They're almost.
There's some in Manchester, yeah.
Who are doing things, and they have succeeded, because if you look at the results, half of our children are probably succeeding.
Yeah. So the question is, you're right. I looked at the figures this morning, and you know, we talk about attainment 8. So if anyone knows, that's the latest nomenclature. So attainment 8 refers to the getting an average mark in 8 GCSE subjects, including maths and English. And when you look at that figure, the most successful group are Chinese at 70+%. And when you look at
Asian is about 59%,
and black children, if you break it into Caribbean and African, it's under 50%. So you're right, 50% are getting GCSEs, and at least then that opens doors.
Yes.
It's the other 50%, and you're right, majority of the parents would probably want their child to succeed. It's how do we get that?
Yeah, how we need to reach out to them. I mean, I'm part of the church group too, but we need to do a lot more. We're a bit insular. We deal with our congregation and that's it. But we need to extend beyond our congregation and reach out to the wider community as to how we bring them in, how we skill them up to navigate the system. Yeah. And it can be done. It's hard work, but it requires dedication. It requires selflessness, not just looking after ourselves, but making that sacrifice, stepping back from ourselves and reaching out to those out there. I believe we can do it if we can mobilize all these various groups.
Thank you. Sorry to cut you. I want to get to next steps, but before I get to next step, this question about does our community understand it? And Richard, I think, has made a really good point in that the current situation now with young people, 45% now are getting a degree. So, and Richard's right. So the landscape has changed. So Paul talked about not leaving school with not much qualifications because of the system. And we haven't got time to talk about that, and we might touch on that. But I wonder now, and this is where I think, how can we inform our community? I wonder now in the current climate that if you left school with no qualification, would it be possible to get a reasonable job, considering, and this is something that Tony Blair did. We talk about education, education, education. He said, okay, I want to go at the university end. So we got more graduates than ever before. I would have tackled it at the post 16 to make sure more 16-year-olds are qualified. So do you think our communities are aware?
Could I make a little point?
Yeah.
In that, in my little book, The Enlightenment, I used a phrase which is called system consciousness. And what I mean by that is that if you don't have it, you're going to fail in any society, not just British society. In any way you live, you have to be conscious of the system. And therefore, a lot of people aren't. And for example, in Edinburgh and the Lothians, they found that there were only 2 BAME managers in the NHS from the nursing staff, and you had highly qualified staff up to staff nurse, but nobody above that, just 2. And we looked at it and we devised a course in order to make the staff more system conscious and to also make the manager, the bosses, more system conscious, because they didn't understand the BME culture. And the BME didn't understand, to some degrees, the white culture, so to speak. And one good example is a young man, highly qualified nurse up to staff, but wouldn't get promoted, couldn't. And he didn't understand why. And I asked the bosses, I said, why have you not promoted this young man? And they said, he keeps turning up for these interviews in a linen suit. Because he felt it was cool, you know. And I spoke to him and I said, well, why do you do that? He said, what's that got to do with my qualifications and my abilities? I can wear what I like. And the only way I could get through to him is to say, you have a 5-year-old daughter and there are 2 men standing on the side of the road and you want to leave it with one of them. One is dressed in a policeman's uniform and the other one isn't. I'm not saying they're going to be any better or any good, but you have to make a choice. Which one would you leave her with? And he said, the one dressed as a policeman. I said, that's what they're saying to you. Solved it. He realized what we were saying, the justification was there, and he did it. So a lot, for example, the system thought the Chinese people were not reliable because they never looked you in the eye. So they didn't understand the system of the Chinese. And they thought Nigerians had aggressive language, so that was part of their personality. It's just a language when somebody's speaking English from another language. And therefore, there are loads of things like that where Black people, Black kids are highly qualified. But then if you are middle class, you are taught these things. If you go to Eton, so, you know, the country is being run by a terribly small, a small group of people or a large group of people from a small educational pool because they are trained to run the system as well as being qualified. And thus we have to, if we're going to do that adjustment, we are talking about teaching people about the system. In Jamaica, I remember that my family would believe that education is for the school and they shouldn't interfere. They shouldn't. But we had a system who was aware of that. And therefore the school had almost a parental aspect as well to it. The point is that doesn't happen here.
Yeah.
And therefore we have to point that out to them, or we have to get the system here to make adjustments of how they teach. certain sectors or areas in our society.
And if I could just continue to enhance what Sir Geoff is saying, I do not believe that within our community, we have that depth of understanding about system consciousness. Because when I was head of recruitment for Europe, Middle East, Africa in Shell International Chemicals, one of the most important criterion that we used in selecting people we hired was relationship skills. And if they did not have developed relationship skills, their qualifications alone would not take them through. And in fact, the 4 key criteria, which I feel pretty confident are still being used in Shell to select its hires, particularly its graduate hires: achievement orientation. Do you have a history of doing things, it almost doesn't matter what, providing it's legal, and achieving something in those things? Do you have enough relationship skills? Do you understand how to work with and through other people and overcome difficulties which will invariably arise from people who are not on the same page as you? What's your approach for dealing with those difficult situations? Do you have enough intellectual horsepower, i.e., not only from your qualifications, but your ability to learn new things quickly, rather than it's like being wading through treacle because you've been told the same thing 101 times and you still don't get it? That intellectual horsepower. And most important of all, the helicopter factor. Do you have the ability to see the big picture of the situation you're in and identify what you need to do in order to get the desired outcome? Now, we might think those are just 4 phrases and those are 4 words, but they go to the heart of the sort of portable qualities that Shell looks for when it wants to hire people who are going to go all the way. Now, I'm a product of that selection process. I didn't know those criteria when I was being hired, but when I moved across from business management into recruitment, those 4 criteria were emphasized and trained, and we were shown how to assess them. And for me, that is a living example of being conscious of that selection process in order to sort out the wheat from the chaff. And so at the heart of what Sir Geoff is saying, and that we all have experienced, is that the Qualification Society presents itself in more ways than just paper qualifications. Do you understand how the system operates? Do you know how to actually work with the system effectively? The dress code is just part of that whole mix. The use of language, not just orally, but in writing, is part of that whole mix. We've all heard the joke about Italian time, or should we call it Jamaican time, or should we call it Caribbean time? You know, you feel you've arrived early because you've arrived 15 minutes after the start time. That's part of the system consciousness. So I believe this conversation about the Qualification Society is about all of that. And do we believe that our community understands that in its entirety in order to help to prepare our young people? My gut and my experience tells me not well enough, not enough of us understand that well enough. Discuss.
Richard wanted to say something.
Yeah.
I was just wondering whether, in fact, sort of 2 things here. One is how much of self-reflection and how much are people willing to step up to the plate here to help everyone else, so that there are, Keith and Dwain and people have mentioned that the churches and the institutions, there are enough people who have been through university, who understand some of the issues, but actually there is we need to be able to reach out to make the move beyond the I'm all right, and I can actually help my community. And that's a selfless activity. That's quite difficult to get people to embrace. But that's actually what's required here. One of the things about, so if I can just mention the Cowrie Scholarship Foundation, we want to take disadvantaged Black British students through our universities. But besides the financial commitment, one of the things that's unique about the program is mentorship and internships and exposure that's going to give them something unique, as well as the qualification. Because I think we're all in agreement that education matters. I said right at the beginning, knowledge is power. It's transformed everyone's lives. But actually, with 45% of people gaining a degree, you do need to think, as a community, what are we going to do to help our youngsters go forward? And so we need our individuals to actually step up, to actually say, this is what you can do. This is how I can help you. This is how you can help yourself. The growth mindset, all those things that mean that when you arrive for that interview with Dwain and Shell, you've got more than just a qualification or the certification that Paul or Angela have, that you've got something that says, this is what's going to give you the added value. And I think as a community, we have to think, how do we address that? And how do we get people to help in that process? And I think that's perhaps something we're not doing enough of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've all nicely come on to next steps, and we've already talked about that. But and I know we've got about 10 or so minutes left. We've almost been discussing this for an hour and a half, which I know is our time. So and it's been really valuable, and there's a lot more we can say. But I want us to see if we can come to solutions. And I should stress, when I reflect on this, and in fact, Sir Geoff has kind of hinted at this around solutions, because our community have been incredibly resilient. When Sir Geoff talked about education subnormal schools, don't forget, it was our community who actually set up supplementary schools. Yeah. So they recognized the problem and said, okay, we're going to try and fix it. So there is that aspect that of us being solution orientated. But supplementary schools, we know there's very few now. So, and Dwain's hinted, and so Keith has commented on this about the church doing more. And I have to say, I went to, Keith invited me to the Seventh-day Adventist education event. They specifically have a day or a weekend where they talk about education, and I think it's fantastic that the Seventh-day Adventist does that. So there are solutions out there, but I think what Richard and indeed Dwain has said is really important. It's those additional skills. We often refer to them as soft or transferable, but they're now seen as really key. So I wonder if anyone could, what next steps can we do?
Well, can I come in here?
Yeah, certainly.
Yes, I think from my vantage point, in terms of if we're going to have changes or a paradigm shift in the culture that we're operating in, it requires that is essential feature, which we call leadership. You don't get change without leadership. So if we want to change our community, there has to be some degree of leadership to do that. It's the catalyst for change, and that is where I think, in a small way, many of the organizations like Reed Society are there to give leadership to the community as to how we can make these changes and for the betterment of our community and our people. So leadership is one. And well, the second point I've hinted to, we need a platform. So we need organizations that you can be the platform for giving that leadership. So we have organizations, churches, and others. So it comes to the my third point: leadership one, platform, mobilization. How do we mobilize? The two, leadership and the platforms. And I don't know have the answer, but I think we need some mechanism to mobilize these elements, essential elements. Leadership has to be at the forefront of any change. You have to have a platform, a structure to do that, but you need some catalyst to mobilize that. And the fourth one is individual, or my own personal individualistic contribution too. All of us can contribute in a small way. I believe in that too. That on the micro level, that's the macro level I'm talking about. But on the micro level, as in church we would say, let your light shine in your small corner. And for example, in my small corner, that's why we have the book about educational platform for the development of Black children and the education. It's a small contribution, but it to me, it is important. I remember one brother in our church got the book, and he read it, and he was worried about certain things about his child at school. He was not empowered, but having read the book, he went on to school. He told me he was able to go down to school and talk in a more intelligent way as to what he wants for his child. So that is the kind of empowerment we need to do on the macro level and on the micro level. What can I also do to shape a life? Even if we change one person's life, that's good. So
can I come in here, Donald, to ask Angela possibly?
Yeah.
I know Angela as the chief executive of RAFFA. RAFFA is doing some tremendous work. I also know that your church community, Church of God of Prophecy, does tremendous work. Just listening to the points made by Keith, is there any alignment between the RAFFA Church of God of Prophecy that you can share with us that's actually taking place? This isn't theoretical.
I can. Currently, I'm chairing a group of stakeholders across the denominations that is specifically looking at young people and their attainment, leadership, and identity. So, in fact, I was online with the representatives from the different churches, the Church of God in Christ, New Testament Church, COGOP. Obviously, I'm representing RAFFA as well, and other churches, Ascension Trust, and the free churches. And what we are going to do is put on the 10th of September, we will be putting on an event, really reaching out to young people across all denominations to come together to discuss evangelism, leadership, and identity specifically. And that's an initiative that has, because I hear people say that the church isn't doing enough. And I agree, we do need to raise awareness about these issues around our young people, and really to address a lot of the issues that have been discussed on this platform, including education, but also some of the soft skills that are being spoken about. So we recognize that as a church, and recognize that, we have an issue. We have an issue with our young people, and we need to collaborate to make that difference. So small steps, I hear you say, small steps, but steps nonetheless. So that's certainly the first step that we're taking as a church community to do something about addressing the issues.
But here is my suggestion, building on the back of what you're saying. Just from this team of experts, you've heard from Sir Geoff. He knows inside out about system consciousness because he and I have spoken about it several times. You've heard from Professor Richard Oreffo. He understands the value of mentoring and internship. And you know very well what we do. My belief is that you have access to the information that may not be plentiful in your organization. I'm not even thinking of RAFFA, I'm thinking about your churches, communities. I would say, invite us to come and help to close some of those gaps. You shouldn't have to invent the solutions yourself. The answers already exist, and we're talking with each other.
Yeah.
And Keith, I would say the same thing to the Adventist church movement, because I know your church movement is big on education. It's one of the first things I discovered about you when I started working with you in my, Lerica and Associates business. Yeah. But I also know that perhaps you're not covering all the bases. But we do have people that we know through Reach Society who have those skills, who have those understandings. So make use of us.
Yeah. Although, to be fair to Keith, he did invite me to an event. So
yeah, but to be fair to you, Donald, you're not the provider of the whole solution.
Oh, no.
Yeah? So
can I say this? Of course, I had
no, I recall, but there was an educational summit. You had Gus John, you had a whole host of speakers. I remember that event.
Yeah, but Donald and Keith, after all the speechifying, there is the rubber hit the road advice to our parents, where you have parents in the room and they're saying, this is what we need, this is what we want, and they get practical solution. We have a lot of speechifying going on in our community.
No, I would say, Dwain, when a couple of the events I had Donald in on have been practical stuff in the church with people asking questions and advice given to them. I want to, I will propose with my colleagues inside my church to have you and others on, because that's how we made changes. So and you've been before, because if you remember, I had you at Brixton, a big audience there, Dwain.
Yeah, that's over 20 years ago now, it feels like. And I'm sure a few more young people needed advice in between. But you're right. Yeah. I mean,
all I said, they will still recognize you, Dwain.
we have the potential to do so much more. And really, that's the recognition that we need to act on, that agency. And, let me throw a little bit more of a grenade in this mix, because the world as defined in the United Kingdom is not the whole world. And I say that because, Keith, you and I have talked about the external comparison that goes on between the education system across 79 countries.
Yes.
The PISA survey, for those who are not familiar with it, the Program for International Student Assessment at age 15 compares the education system, the secondary education system, across 79 different countries. This wonderful country of ours never gets above 14th. We're not in the top 5, we're not in the top 10, which means many of our young people are not world class in terms of the education they achieve by 15. That should concern our community with our focus on education. And that's why I know we have organizations like Amos Bursary, like RAFFA, and many others out there, because we recognize those fault lines in the very education system that we all have. So for me, the challenge is more than just, are we getting the information around our community well enough? We need to have an eye, a firm eye, to how do we measure up internationally? And at this moment in time, the whole country doesn't measure up internationally at the secondary school stage. And our community is somewhere off that pace as well.
Well, if I may come in here, Dwain, through the chairman, Donald, is that all right?
Yeah, you can come in. We're going to have about 5 more minutes, because I know we're coming to the end. I want to get everybody to have a say at the end.
I'll do this in a minute. I think what Dwain is saying is very important. We can't fix the system totally. So we have to have our contingency plan to deal with our community. And so we have to have those intervention programs within, as I said, that structure already. And it's for us to mobilize that, number one. But we have to have a clear vision. Given that the system can't be fixed, what's the message we're sending out to our community in terms of the way forward? And I may have said this before, we've got to help our young people in our community to understand that self-determination is paramount in terms of where we go on 3 levels. Qualifications, yes, but it may not solve all our problems because you may have degrees and so forth and no jobs. So we need to also add in the mix this comprehensive story of qualifications, expertise, and this is where we talk about Angela and Paul, the experts. They can fend for themselves. It's not rocket science. They're fending for themselves because they became experts. We've got to mobilize and encourage a culture of not just qualification, expert status and enterprise. I'm talking about the long term, way down the road. We need to strive and to drive an engine for self-determination and independence. We can't wait for the system to be fixed.
Thank you. So can I get all of you to give sort of your last points, your summary points?
That was mine.
Could I just say quickly, from my experience, one of our problems is we have a diverse society, and I've used this phrase that companies have picked it up. A diverse society requires diverse management. And part of the issue is not just qualifications. We are underrepresented in management. And we're underrepresented in management because when our people go for interviews, etc., they are perceived of not having the capacity to manage. It doesn't matter how qualified they are. And this applies in medicine, it applies in all fields. And therefore, that's something we have to try and address. Because if we don't have our people in management, then decisions are going to be made without our input. Is that critical? The point is that we have to, and what I gave the example where we did with Edinburgh and Lothian NHS, we started with 2 managers and we ended up with 25 in 3 years. So training is critical. It's not just word of mouth. And we, therefore, one thing we can do is get institutions to do that training. And we can advise or in that, because we need BME managers in our society. And therefore, that would be my point. We need the qualifications. That's one issue. But we need people who, when they go for interviews, will be selected. No matter how qualified they are, people could be in their job for 20 years and they're not in management positions. So we must work with institutions to try and change that. And we must also work to ensure that the kids get qualifications so they can compete. Inequalities in education makes equal opportunity a nonsense. And we must also, though, try and give that view that a diverse society requires diverse management to be fair and efficient.
Thank you, Sir Geoff. Thank you, Sir Geoff. So we've come to the end. So I just want to make sure I can give everybody a 30-second, because I'm sure Craig will say, hold on, we've run way over time. So I can give anyone, I like to go around the room to your reflection of our discussion and any other solutions that you can think of. Paul, I'll start with you, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Donald. I mean, I've listened to the back end of this, and putting that like my policy hat on, which gets a bit boring. I bore my wife with it. It seems to me that really what we're talking about, I think Keith mentioned it, is a cultural shift. And if you're talking about cultural change, you need to plan it. And you need to identify, because there are a number of factors involved. You need to identify what those factors are. You need to identify what the possible barriers are, and then you can start talking more about the solutions. So I agree with what Dwain is saying. Even, you know, there's stuff that we can do in the ECA. We started doing it because you guys take part in our Careers Day, where we use professional people to talk to our children. But one of the things that we've identified after several years of doing it is that there is a gap, and that missing gap is the parents. So we've actually started now to talk about, hold on a minute, we're talking to the kids, but we really need the parents. So one of the things we've been talking about is whether or not we need to start actually running courses for parents or parental classes, because we've identified, you know, which is what's been said here, that in order for the kids to have a better understanding of education, the parents need to acquire better knowledge of the educational pathways that are available to their children. So I think this is actually, I'm sorry to not saying pouring cold water in it, I think this is actually quite a big job. And I think we need to kind of talk about it and think about it a lot more.
Yeah.
I think it's also what Keith said. I think there's some short-term stuff that we can do, and I think we can identify those very easily. But there's a much, much bigger, as I said, cultural shift, which I think is required, which I think personally will require a lot of planning.
Thank you.
I would definitely, I would definitely agree with you, Paul. And, you know, I agree with, you know, the majority of what has been said here tonight. I hear what you say, Dwain, and I take the challenge. I live the challenge. You know, I am now in a position, I suppose, of influence, and I say that unashamedly. And because of that, I am able to support people to get into education, even people who are within the adult health and social care system, who are deemed to be the lowest level. You know, I have seen and been able to support people to go to university, people who never thought that they would be able to go to university, people who are taking on apprenticeships, you know, and advancing themselves. And I do believe that more of that needs to happen. People do need to understand the system. People do need to understand that it is possible. You know, I tell my story all the time, that it is never too late. It is never too late to get an education. Yes, we need to focus on the youngsters, but also people that's why there is disproportionate situations, because, you know, people feel that they're stuck and they can't go any further. As I said, because I have that influence, I will continue to share, continue to help, support, and make sure that the modern Black community gets the message. And together, collaboratively, with us, you know, maybe us being the catalyst for change, then we can advance that even further and make the change in the statistics that we're hearing about, you know, so that there is more advancement and not a decline in people going on to further education from the Black community. So I take the challenge.
Thank you. Richard, your final thoughts and reflection.
I'll keep it very brief. It's what I said right at the beginning. I think knowledge is power in the widest sense. Knowledge in terms of the qualification, knowledge of the soft skills that you need. What is your unique selling point that's going to give you that advantage? We need to be aware of that. And really thinking about purpose, and purpose not only of ourselves, purpose of the community, and purpose of the individual. When you know your purpose, everything is possible.
Thank you. I like that. When you know your purpose, everything is possible. Wow. Keith.
Well,
thoughts and reflections.
A lot already. All I would say is that on the micro front, that's where we can have influence with people we know personally. I'm trying to do that, where at times I may be asked to intervene on behalf of a parent. There's one coming up for me to do it in terms of a parent having a problem with a school. So on that microfront, I pledge myself, my life to support parents as long as I have life. On the more strategic front, I think that's where we're trying to operate here now. What can we do to set that visionary site in our community? And I think we're getting there. We're not quite there yet, but setting a meeting like this a program like this is helping to set that vision that we can aspire to. So I personally want to be part of that work to help to set that vision. And I did mention it before, that there's 3 things we got to give leadership. We have to have a platform for the message. If we have a message, we need a platform for it. And then we need to mobilize to get it implemented. It's not easy, not only easy, but where there's a will, there will be a way.
Okay, thank you. So Geoff.
I think we have a multiple problem here, and we have we mustn't forget we have a system for which we pay tax, an educational system. And if we were running our university systems like what we're talking about for our kids in primary school, it wouldn't work. Because the university has a structure and it has whatever. The hospital has a structure. And what we've got to understand is the system. And therefore, yes, we must help our own people, and we do it in our organizations. But we must try through our politicians and use what influence we have to try and improve the system for our children, working with parents. So one, we must improve the system politically. That's not going to be easy, but we must bear that in mind. And we must also consider consistency. We can't start helping parents and stop. It must be consistent. But finally, we must be part of the management of this society. And management means management skills, and we must make our people seem to have these, or else we won't be part of policy making and decision making, which will affect our people positively or negatively.
Sure. Thank you, Sir Geoff. It's really funny, the mentioning of PSA, the PISA system, and the fact that at secondary level, the UK is around the 15th. You mentioned universities. The irony of it all, as I'm sure you're aware, when you look at the world ranking of universities, a significant number of them are actually from the UK. And I know Southampton and others, and Nottingham and Imperial, they're all in that. So it's really interesting, isn't it?
Yes, right.
I know Edinburgh and some of the Scottish universities are in that top echelons.
That's right.
So that's interesting. Dwain, your final thoughts and reflection.
Yeah, no, the point you make about the difference between the ranking of our universities compared to the ranking of our secondary education system is an interesting one, because it always feels like a nonsense. But the way I understand it is this: if you're part of the small percentage that gets through to universities, and the high-ranked universities are not the 100 and odd ones in the UK, it's the very top ones. Maybe it's the top half a dozen, at most the top 10 that's in that international ranking and very well placed. But the bulk of our young people are not getting a good education when compared to other countries. And so the majority is not being well served. But my final message is around agency at the family level. There is no getting away from it. If young people in our community are going to succeed, the mindset at the family level has got to be, I want to help my child, I want to help my children to do well. It's got to go beyond just talk. And so my plea to our parents is, if you don't know, go find somebody you believe who does know and go talk to them. And if they don't know, go find someone else and keep talking to people until you find someone who can provide you with that information. That's the best thing you can do for your children, because that then opens the door. Because I know, as someone who's been involved with Reach Society, with you, Donald, and the others who are involved in our management team, there are hundreds of organizations out there who have the knowledge. And so if we're minded to talk to people in our community, we will get the advice and the guidance that we need. But you've got to want to go find it, because Richard is right. Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
It isn't going to come to you by osmosis. You have to go in search of it. That's my message.
Well, thank you very much. And I have to say, I would love this conversation to go on, because I know there's many more, but I'm concerned that Craig, who'll be doing the editing, will be pulling his hair out. And so let me just summarize. It's fantastic, but to try and summarize this is going to be tricky. But let me first talk about all your educational journeys, which is so inspirational, so diverse. But what struck me with all of your educational journey was something I think Richard pointed out. That key word is that curiosity. I thought that's really powerful, because that's when you consider. I'm going slightly off track here because I'm talking about it from a scientific perspective. But if you look at the advancement that we have made as a human race, part of that comes from curiosity and understanding. So that's really important. And I think what's driven all of you, the panelists, has been that curiosity, that drive. We heard from Angela, and that determination. And Richard talked about wanting to help others. And Keith, and that's something which we should embrace. Keith was almost talking about the love of learning, and Paul talked about the enthusiasm of wanting to know more, to become an expert, and Dwain is the innate love of science, and then similarly, so Geoff being an expert. What's really important, I thought, about all your journey was the fact at the family level. And that's really important. Dwain touched on this in his own summary, that agency of having family and friends to support. And we heard like Keith's mum coming down to the school, and Paul, your dad, and similar years, Richard, and your mother's, Angela. So having that family is really key. And I have to say, I'm a chair of governors of a school. And regardless of color, I speak to young people. I'm not talking about them going to university bound or whatever, but just those that, want to kind of, make sure they get a good foundation. 100% of so far, you find that at the family level, there's some aspect, some value. And it doesn't have to be the fact that it's parents. Some I've spoken to are single parents. It's just the fact there's that mind and value set that the young people have. And that's something I've really learned a lot as a chair of governors of a school. So it's at the family level that's really key, and driving that making sure there's that foundation. Then there's the idea for all of us is you guys talk about mentors, and you talk about that luck, and you may describe it as luck, but it's also, I think, what you've all done is to seize opportunity, which I think sometimes we think that's what luck is, but no, it's seizing opportunity. This week we talk about football and England doing well and Raheem Sterling, but I'm mad about football. But just hear me out on this one. And Raheem's not lucky, because as a good striker, like other good strikers, he finds himself in the penalty area, and therefore has the opportunity to score. Okay, so it's not luck. It's about seizing those opportunities. And then when we look at solutions, I think our community has demonstrated the need to want to develop solutions. We talk historically, so Geoff talked about education subnormal, and we talked about the development of supplementary schools. But what's quite interesting, however, even though supplementary schools may not be as many as they have been, what we're forgetting, and Keith and Dwain talked about this, and it's what's happened, however, is the setting up of agencies, organizations, community groups that has, in a sense, filled that gap, because they recognize, directly or indirectly, that there is talent in our community, but there may not be such opportunities. And recognizing that, that's why there's a plethora of Amos groups, Amos Bursary, Reach Society, Urban Synergy, 100 Black Men of London, groups in Manchester, ACAP, what Richard is doing with the Cowrie Foundation. So in a sense, we are coming up with solutions, and what there's now need to be more an engagement with our parents so that they get that and they know about the system and they can support our young people. So can I say a big thanks to Paul Riddell, Dr. Keith Davidson, Angela Clarke, Professor Richard Oreffo, Dr. Dwain Neil OBE, and Professor Sir Geoff Palmer for a stimulating discussion with provided insight and clarity. So that's episode 3 of Ask Our Experts. Thank you. And also to all of you that are listening, thank you for listening and take care.